Hey folks, Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and let's talk Fixing the Sorcerer 3.0. I've made 2 videos on this in the past where I discuss different things I think could be done to fix the Sorcerer, as I do feel it's not as bad as the Ranger, but I do feel it's pretty poorly handled in the fact that it only ever gets 15 spells known. A Paladin will have that many, if not more than that. Several other subclasses will have more than that. I think a Arcana Cleric will have more than that always prepared through its higher level abilities, its divine domain abilities, and that doesn't even include the ones it has to choose to prepare. And this kind of really was driven home, I feel like, when Tasha's Cauldron of Everything was released, showing that the Aberrant Mind and the Clockwork Soul both had origin spells. This was something I had suggested back in Fixing Sorcerer 2.0. I've revised the spell lists for that, so I'll be talking about those. But I think there's 2 key things that they added, and one is the 6th level ability for the Aberrant Mind. I think could be something applied across the board to everybody, and the way they handle the origin spells. So what I mean is, if I jump over here to the psionic spells section for the Aberrant Mind, it gives you the list of spells here. You know, 2. This one's a little bit funky because they get the Mind Sliver spell at 1st level, but if you ignore that, you get 2 spells for levels 1 through, or spell levels 1 through 5. So at 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th, and you can see them here: Arms of Hadar, Dissonant Whispers, and so on. But the thing they added is whenever you gain a sorcerer level, you can replace one of the spells in that list with a different spell of the same level, but that doesn't even have to be from only the sorcerer list. It has to be from the divination or enchantment spell schools from the Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard list. And the same thing was done to the Clockwork Soul, but with different spell schools. So this is how I think we should handle this for our other sorcerers. All of them, the subclasses, should get at least 10 origin spells, and they should also have the ability that when they level up to replace them with a divinate, or with a 2 with spells from the Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard list from, you know, one of 2 schools. The other thing is the 6th level ability of Psionic Sorcery. I think can be applied across the board to all of them, and I'll explain why. So I think the standard ability will be the 6th level ability that all of the other ones have. For the Aberrant Mind, it would be resistance to psychic damage and advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened. But this Psionic Sorcery will just become a standard thing to be X Sorcery, right? Draconic Sorcery, Wild Sorcery, Shadow Sorcery, and so on. And the way it will work is this feature will be slightly tweaked. It says when you cast any spell of 1st level or higher from your Psionic Spells feature, you can cast it expending a spell slot of normal or spend sorcery points equal to the spell's level. So that would be any of the spells from this list. And this is actually better than a Sorcerer's Font of Magic ability, where they convert sorcery points to spell slots, because you're going 1-to-1 as opposed to having to spend 7 sorcery points to get a 5th level slot. Now that's not completely useless though, because that feature allows you to get a slot back, and that lets you choose what you want to cast it on, whereas using the X sorcery feature listed here, you have to choose one from your list. So you're limited to only one of these 10 spells, not the rest of your spell list. But we also see here that it gets something applied automatically when it's cast from it. It says, if you cast it using sorcery points, it requires no verbal or somatic components and no material components unless they're consumed by the spell. So what I think what we're going to do is basically tweak this, and we're going to use meta magic as an option. And essentially it's going to get a free meta magic applied to it. So for example, we are going to, if we jump up here to the class features and look at meta magic, I jumped too far down actually. It's basically the subtle spell feature, right? Which is when you cast it with no somatic or verbal components. So we're actually going to ditch this last bit, which is kind of a nerf, I guess, to the Aberrant Mind, where they're going to have, you know, if you cast a spell using sorcery points, it requires no verbal or somatic components, essentially giving it free subtle spell. So the other one we should talk about is our Clockwork Soul, because as we said, they have their 10 spells here. They get to choose from the Abjuration or Transmutation list. And at 6th level, they would get Clockwork, what do we call it? Clockwork Sorcery. And if we jump down here, it would be, you know, from that spell list, but rather than being no verbal or somatic components. For the Clockwork one, we're going to choose Extended Spell. So that would be spells cast using the sorcery points would have their duration doubled to a maximum of 24 hours. So then I made this table here, which we can go ahead and take a look at if I can get this to snap in here, which is for all of the other ones. So you can see here for Divine Soul Sorcerers, they are going to basically, rather than choosing 10 spells, they're going to get to pick a Cleric domain. Pick the Cleric domain, and you get those 10 spells, and the one they're going to get automatically applied at 6th level is Careful Spell. So if we look at that, that's going to be any spells you use casting sorcery points will be, you can choose a number of creatures equal to your charisma modifier, and they can automatically succeed the saving throw on the spell. Now, I'm not giving them 2 schools because they already have access to the full cleric spell list. So this bit here where it says the new spell must be of the divination or enchantment school from the sorcerer, warlock, or wizard spell list, it will basically be the new spell must be of the sorcerer or cleric spell list. So that way they can have them automatically prepared, again following in line with the sorcerer or the cleric domain spells. For our draconic sorcerers, their domain spells will be absorb elements, chromatic orb, dragon's breath, see invisibility, fear, fly, elemental bane, freedom of movement, control winds, and legend lore. If they want to swap any of these spells out with anything from the sorcerer, warlock, or wizard spell list, they get to choose from the evocation and abjuration schools. And they're going to get theirs if they cast them, which is kind of assuming you will to match whatever dragon type you get. They're going to get the transmuted spell effect applied. So any spells cast using sorcery points will have the ability to change the damage type to acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, or thunder. The Shadow Sorcerer will get Hex, Inflict Wounds, Pass Without Trace, Shadow Blade, Feign Death, Vampiric Touch, Blight, Shadow of Moil, Negative Energy, Flood, and Seeming. Their 2 schools to choose from if they want to swap are Illusion and Necromancy, and the automatically applied meta magic here will be Distant Spell, which is the range is doubled, and if it has a range of touch, the range is now 30 feet. Again, only using sorcery points there. Storm Sorcerer is going to get Fog Cloud, Thunderwave, Gust of Wind, Levitate, Lightning Bolt, Thunderstep, Storm Sphere, Watery Sphere, Destructive Wave, and Wrath of Nature. Their 2 spells they can swap for are Conjuration and Evocation. And the automatically applied one they'll get is Empowered Spell, which is whenever they roll damage, they can choose a number of dice equal to the Charisma modifier and re-roll those. And then lastly, we have our Wild Magic Sorcerer, which will get Chaos Bolt, Color Spray, Enlarge Reduce, Mirror Image, Enemies Abound, Hypnotic Pattern, Confusion, Polymorph, Animate Objects, Mislead, and their 2 swappable schools are Enchantment and Transmutation, and the one that they'll get automatically applied with sorcery points is Quicken Spell, turning the casting time of those spells to a bonus action if they choose to use sorcery points. So that, I think, is a very simplistic way to handle it rather than dealing with my bloodline recovery ability that I'd mentioned before, trying to mimic a wizard's arcane recovery. I think this does a pretty good job. It uses mechanics that clearly Wizards of the Coast think are good because they added them to the game. And I think that that's a pretty good way to handle it. Everybody gets origin spells, and I think this should be something carried forward. And I'm not going to suggest if you want to use this. You can, obviously, if you want to make homebrew and use this, but I think this is a good way to go about it. They all get origin spells. They can choose to swap the origin spells with 2 schools of magic from the Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard spell list, with the exception of, obviously, Divine Soul using Cleric. And then at 6th level, they can use their sorcery points to cast anything from their sort of origin spell list, but they get a meta magic automatically applied. And again, if you would like, I mean, maybe you think that some of the ones I chose were poor options and they should have maybe Twin Spell, maybe Heightened Spell. I don't know. These are all things you could do, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments down below. Also, again, if you create or come up with other additional meta magics in your homebrew, this could be an option to add to those as well. The only other thing I have as a potential fix for the Sorcerer is to decouple them from Charisma and actually make them a Constitution-based caster. Now, this is a little bit different because every class needs Constitution, but no one is specifically using it. But given the fact that your sorcerer magic abilities come from your bloodline and your heritage, blood, lifeblood, Constitution, Fortitude, kind of could make sense that your casting stat would be Constitution. And that would be actually a really interesting fix. Now, that doesn't fix some of the inherent issues that we talked about here, like the origin spells, but it also would do something nice to decouple so many casting classes from charisma, right? We have Bard, we have Paladin, we have Warlock, and we have Sorcerer, all using charisma. This would break one out and make it Constitution-based, which would, yeah, it might hamper some multi-classing options, sure, but I think it would be interesting to try that out. Let me know what you think about that as well. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already and you like what I do here, whether it be news coverage, top 10 videos, or things like this where we talk about fixing things, or I just give you a heads up and possibly education on bits of 5th edition that you might not be aware of, consider, again, subscribing, because it does help the channel, it helps me, and it makes me want to keep making said videos. Also, thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for continuing to support me and the channel. I will see you all next time.